Napoleon Bonaparte, 1769 to 1821, famous warriors and soldiers in history who, as French leaders, sacrificed for the unification of Europe. Once upon a time, on the island of Corsica, off the west coast of Italy, a little boy was playing with his brother. Later, a boy named Napoleon Bonaparte became one of the most honored figures in the world in human history. By becoming a general at the age of 24, he can be compared to the most astonishing military genius, such as Hannibal, Joseph, Caesar, and Saint-Sécan. To some historians, he was a deeply emotional hero, extending the French Revolution's high-level trade wisdom on freedom and equality throughout Europe. For 20 years he ruled France, creating laws that France still uses today. He established himself as emperor and smart leader, strong, attractive and lofty in all life in West Europe. At the same time, Napoleon's achievements came at a terrible cost in a bloody war. He fought in battle, and his army lost 500,000 lives. In the end, other European powers joined forces to overthrow him and deported him to the island St. Helena, located in the far South Atlantic Ocean. It was there that he passed away. What really made him want such an adventure? Was it the desire for admiration, global glory, or power, and what motivated him to work so hard to win again and again? When Napoleon's parents married, his father Carlo was 18 years old and his mother, the beautiful Letizia, was only 14 years old. During the 6 years of their marriage, they had only 2 children. The first son was Joseph, and a year later, Napoleon was born in Corsica Island. The French occupied the Corsica Island just 1 year before Napoleon was born, and in his childhood and adolescence, Napoleon finally conquered the French, so he was determined to sacrifice his life to get an independence for his homeland. Napoleon's family did not have much money, but since they were in the aristocracy, they were able to send their sons. 2, along with another daughter, went to a prestigious French school with scholarships. So at the age of 9, Napoleon was sent by his father to France to attend military academy in Brienne. The boy Napoleon was already known as a wrestler. Despite being smaller than other children his age, Napoleon was determined and did what he wanted to do. He angrily strikes when a French classmate mocks him from his origins in Corsica and is of Italian descent. Most of the time, he is unhappy and irritable. But when he wants to impress others, he is very attractive. Initially, he majored in mathematics and science, as well as history and geography. Although Napoleon was not the best student in his class, his teacher recognized him as a special student. One teacher praised his extraordinary talent for designing defenses, consider him a stubborn and aggressive person. In 1784, Napoleon was admitted to the École Militaire Military Academy in Paris, the most famous place in France. A year later, he graduated, ranking 42nd out of 85 students. At the age of 16, he became a lieutenant in the French artillery. 7 years later, it was the worst time for Napoleon. With so little money that he could afford to spend on food, he bought books on military strategy, especially the use of artillery. His father died in 1785. Napoleon and his brother Joseph were responsible for their mother and 4 others. On his return to Corsica, Napoleon became an officer in the Corsica National Guard. His main goal was still to focus on the means of liberating from French rule for the island of Corsica. In 1793, the leader of the French Revolution assassinated King Louis XVI, and this became an event that all Corsica residents understood. Seen as an opportunity to declare independence, and later they also implemented immediately. By then Napoleon had become a staunch supporter of the revolution, blocking out criticism of the wealthy French aristocracy and religious leaders who had laid a solid foundation. However, in the eyes of Pascal Paulina, the governor of the sea, the governor of the Corsica Islands of the Bonaparte family, Napoleon I himself was an unreliable person. Faced with the threat of Paulina, Napoleon helped his mother and younger siblings escape to safety in southern France. So far no one was able to send in the perfect solution, which is not strange. No enjoy or achieve anything. Having been ridiculed by his classmates and living in poverty, forcing him to flee his beloved homeland, the future for Napoleon seems bleak. With only a handful of jobs to choose from, he rejoined the army and, under the influence of a friend, Napoleon was promoted to lieutenant. Shortly afterwards, Napoleon had the opportunity to gain power and fame. When the French port city of Toulon revolted against the revolutionary government, the city received aid from the British Navy. Napoleon, in charge of artillery, immediately realized that the cannon, placed at a high position on the port, it could seriously damage British ships. Despite being wounded in the capture of a major base on the mountain, he was still in charge of firing on British ships. Eventually, Britain retreated and Toulon was recaptured by France. As a reward, Napoleon, then only 24 years old, was promoted to brigadier general. Strangely enough, this ascension almost cost him his life. The decision to make him a general was made by Robespierre, the leader of the French terrorist government, before being sent to be executed in July 1794 for accused of supporting the Napoleonic terrorist regime. He was taken into custody. For 2 weeks, his life was in doubt. He later persuaded his captors to release him. A year later, supporters of the former French monarchy tried to regain control of Paris, and a group of monarchs took action to retake the Tuileries there, as one of those in charge of defending Napoleon. Let his artillery fire shells on intrusive crowds. Many of the attackers were killed and the building was safe. For his efforts, Napoleon was now promoted to lieutenant general. At this point, the young Napoleon became a popular hero and was invited by Republican leaders to a number of parties with the participation of attractive girls. In 1796, 26-year-old Napoleon married a beautiful nobleman, Josephine de Beauharnais, a widow 6 years her senior, and had a 12-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son. 2 days after the wedding, he went to the battlefield and was appointed commander of the army on the Italian border. Realizing that his army was underarmed, undertrained, and undernourished, he promised them great rewards if they won the battle, as he had promised. That as soldiers you have enough clothes and food to eat. Rich provinces and big cities will be under your power and there you will get honor, prosperity and wealth. Do you want it? His army in Italy won one victory after another. Later, against orders from Paris, Napoleon directly fought against France's strongest enemy in Europe, Austria. On his way through lightning, he crossed the Alps and headed for Vienna, Austria, distance 96 kilometers. The Austrians, faced with the fact that they almost lost the battle, they called for a ceasefire in the Campo Formio Treaty drafted by Napoleon. They agreed to hand over much of Belgium and some islands off the coast of Greece to French control. Napoleon sent property and money confiscated from the war to Paris. At the same time, he formed the government of northern Italy, implementing the French revolutionary liberal ideas. But in one night he became famous all over Europe and even in America. Only Britain remained opposed to French rule on the continent. Napoleon initially wanted to invade the British Channel, but a direct look at the Channel coast gave up the idea that the British Navy was too strong, very invasive. Instead, he launched a campaign in Egypt. There, he was able to lay the foundation for French power in the Mediterranean and at the same time cut off Britain's main trade route to India. In the spring of 1798, he invaded Egypt. Some French leaders, including the talent, were overjoyed to see the popular and ambitious Napoleon move away from Paris because they feared Napoleon would seize power. Mediterranean Sea. He later captured Alexandria, the ancient city of Egypt. Finally, in the Battle of the Pyramids, he pushed the defenders of Cairo back to the desert and took complete control of northern Egypt. When the fighting ended, he hastened to build schools and hospitals for the Egyptians. He modernized the government, started irrigation projects and planned to build a huge Swedish canal connecting the Sea Mediterranean to the Red Sea and the vast Indian Ocean, as well as Pacific Ocean. However, a major defeat followed the shadow of Napoleon's campaign on Egyptian soil. Without a ship to rescue Napoleon's army, though superior to the British, could not escape from Egypt or receive reinforcements. Napoleon launched another attack on Syria, hoping to open the gate to the north, but was blocked by Britain. As Napoleon faced such difficulties, Turkey, along with Britain, Russia, and Opus formed an alliance against French aggression. The Taliban also turned away from French rule. Napoleon was also in a state of severe loneliness. He also decided to do an urgent job. Leaving his army in Egypt, Napoleon fled to Paris, escaping the pursuit of 2 British ships. Upon his arrival in Paris, he conspired with the Talleyrand Rosduicos and Emmanuel Sierra to stage a coup attempt to seize power in the French government. On November 9 and 10, 1799, they were victorious and formed a new government, called the Consular Government, with Napoleon as the first consul with almost all military power. Napoleon himself led French troops across the Alps into Italy after defeating the Austrian army in the Battle of Rango. Napoleon considered it his greatest military victory. The United Kingdom soon signed the Amiens Treaty with France. At least Europe has been at peace for some time. Napoleon came up with a new idea: to hold elections. The French people went to the polls in support of the question of whether Napoleon Bonaparte was a lifelong consul. After the election, Napoleon diverted his attention to create the Bank of France and also improved the quality of education. One thing is more important. He played a key role in establishing the Napoleonic Law, which is still used in France to this day. Despite his great power, he was not satisfied. He ordered the capture and shooting of opposition monarchs. One act that was considered inhumane was that he had the royalist leader Dutch d'Anzian, the leader of Germany, be arrested and taken to France for execution. This proposal won him the admiration of the people who supported the French Revolution, and it also frightened other Europeans. Unsatisfied with the power and prominence he gained, Napoleon finally decided to proclaim himself Emperor of France on December 2, 1804, at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. He wore the crown of Pope Francis VII on his own head. Shortly afterwards, Napoleon also served as King of Italy from a simple childhood. A simple childhood on the island of Corsica. Napoleon was born with great talent, working tirelessly to become one of the most powerful figures in history. From small to large, Napoleon did not change his character, that is, this great man rarely laughs in his life. But when he laughs is loud and loses control. With a stubborn attitude, impatient and irritable, he believes that most people are motivated to do something out of fear and self-interest. Besides, he does not believe in friendship, as he used to say, "Friendship is just words, I do not care about it." Instead, he used others for his own benefit. Napoleon's government soon followed in the footsteps of the old French monarchy. On almost every occasion he bragged about his power and encouraged writers, artists, and musicians to use him as a subject for their work. Despite his glorious victories, Napoleon was still hungry for constant prosperity and victory in the flames of war. Napoleon used to say that my power came from glory and my glory came from victory I gained. My power could collapse if I did not rely on it as a basis for more prosperity and a new victory. However, Napoleon's goal to establish an empire abroad was a resounding victory. On the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, his army contracted yellow fever and was attacked by black Haitian leader Toussaint Powers, and his plans to continue French activity in Egypt and the Indian Ocean also failed. He dreamed of establishing a French empire in the United States and eventually sold the Louisiana to the United States in 1803 for $15 million. Only. At the same time, other European countries could not remain silent about Napoleon's ambitions, especially Britain, which found it difficult to do business with Europe as France occupied the Atlantic coast from Belgium to northern Italy. Shortly afterwards, Austrian and Russian leaders joined Britain, and later with the Prussian kingdom, to oppose the expansion of France. When Austria declared war, Napoleon was furious again. His army destroyed the Austrians in Olympus and later destroyed the army of joint between Austria and Russia in Osmolet. According to historians, it was Napoleon's greatest victory, for some leaders may have been obsessed with such a victory, but for Napoleon he went to a meeting with King Alexander I of Russia. The two leaders agreed to divide Europe, with Russia controlling Eastern Europe and France occupying the West. However, British General Hareton Nelson made Napoleon's plan catastrophic again. In a naval battle in the Atlantic near Trafalgar, Spain, Nelson was killed. But the British almost completely destroyed the French navy by not occupying the sea. Napoleon lost all hope of occupying the British island. Unable to invade Britain, Napoleon established a continental system to block trade between Britain and Europe. When Portugal and Spain refused to cooperate with him in blocking, he himself led French troops to invade and occupy both countries. After his return to France, an open revolt erupted against French occupation, with the help of British troops led by Dutch Wellington, Portugal, and Spain, defeating French troops. In June 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia. What surprised him was that the commander of the Russian army, Kutuzov, did not rush forward to resist him. On the contrary, Kutuzov gradually withdrew. At the same time, crops and shelters that could benefit Napoleon's army were destroyed. In September at Borodino, Napoleon finally faced Kutuzov in a bloody battle that could overthrow him if he continues to Moscow. This time, as before, Russia retreated, leaving Moscow to become a desert. The day after Napoleon arrived in Moscow, a fire broke out. Let the city become a sea of flames that almost completely destroy the city. Meanwhile, Alexander the Great still refuses to meet Napoleon to negotiate. In 1812, a rapid winter occurred in Russia. With no shelter, no food, thousands of French troops died from the icy cold. Napoleon finally realized that he had no choice but to retreat. His retreat from the snowfall was met with a catastrophe, with the Russian cavalry of the Cossack chasing after him at every step. Of the 450,000 troops that entered Russia in June, only 10,000 remained in combat when they returned to France. At that time, seeing a good opportunity for them, Europe under France rose up against Napoleon. Prussia and Austria announced a new alliance with Britain and Russia to oppose Napoleon. They demanded that Napoleon hand over additional territories for the establishment of the French Empire. In October 1813, in the so-called Battle of the Nation, Allied forces defeated Napoleon's Gang Army. Spain and Italy then rose up against it. The Netherlands and Belgium also rose up against it. In France itself, people began to grow weary of his arrogance and pride. They no longer talk about unrequited love for him, instead they are angry with him. They demand peace. Allied troops have entered Paris. Despite opposing the brave young French army that Napoleon had gathered, the whole city finally surrendered. Napoleon finally realized that a hopeless situation had arrived. At a historic meeting in Fontainebleau, April 4, 1814, Napoleon agreed to step down. The Allies named a successor to Louis XVIII, the brother of Louis XVI who the French revolutionaries killed. Napoleon tried to poison himself to death but failed. The victorious Allies deported him to El Island Inn. During the trip, he disguised himself, but when he was recognized, people became angry and cursed at him. At the age of 45, it seems that his role in life came to light. However, after a while, the French people really had little love for King Louis XVI, who used his power to oppress them with foreign forces. And the Allies could not agree on a future map of Europe. Napoleon was tired of life on the island of El, and with the opportunity passed, he immediately snatched it to restore his reputation. On March 1, 1815, he entered French territory again. His ex-soldiers, who had been sent to capture him, joined him. As he sailed to Paris, a group of young peasants joined him in supporting one of his commanders. His former commander, Marshal, promised to arrest him, put him in a metal cage, and send him to Paris. But when they met, Lee joined Napoleon's army and promised to be faithful to him forever. In less than 3 weeks, Napoleon arrived in Paris. There he was greeted by a roaring crowd. King Louis XVIII fleeing the city and Napoleon became a leader again. He promised a new constitution and free elections. He promised peace and no more war. But the Allies did not believe and trust his promises. They mobilized troops on the French border to destroy him. Napoleon did not wait for them to arrive. Instead, he attacked and defeated the Prussian forces sent to Belgium to capture him. Later, on June 15, 1815, in Waterloo, Belgium, Napoleon launched a fierce border attack against British troops in trouble by Dutch Wellington. It was Lincoln who inflicted unforgettable pain on France during the Spanish War. And now this Wellington, with the cooperation of the Prussian generals, destroyed Napoleon's dream of victory. Defeated at Waterloo, he surrendered his new glory for 100 days and vanished. Now, Napoleon asked to be deported to the United States, but Britain refused. They sent him to the remote island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic, where he spent much time. Many days living with his close friends. They read classic literature, played cards, and chatted until late at night, most of which he co-organized. He also read the history and biography, especially of the life of the Greek writer Pluto, about the ancient Greek and Roman heroes. The issue of what history would say made him anxious, and he described his life journey to women to compile. During the many years on Helena, Napoleon did not exercise much and gained weight. He often clashes with British officials in charge of the island. He could not adapt to the weather and the food he was given. Suddenly, in 1817, his health showed signs of deterioration, especially from a stomach ailment that had claimed his father's life. Gradually, his condition worsened until he could not get out of bed. Realizing that the end of his life was drawing to a close, he wrote a letter and simply asked, "My remains must be on the shores of the river Seine among the French people I love dearly." On March 5, 1821, Napoleon died at the age of 52. Finally, in 1840, his body was transported to Paris and deposited in a circular basement under the top of the Les Invalides in Paris, which remains to this day. His speech in Wars, 3/4 turns on personal character and relation. The balance of manpower and materials counts only for the remaining quarter. A prince who get reputation for good nature in the first year of his reign, is laughed at in the second. Napoleon